From CSDC, the Charter Schools Development Center.
With the wave of artificial intelligence and AI, especially now, and the availability of that is really going to require us educators to think differently about how we teach and how we provide instruction and what student skills are needed.
Welcome to Boarding Pass, your ticket to effective charter school governance. I'm Caitlin O'Halloran Hellar, and more than 20 years ago, I got the bright idea that I was going to start a charter school. My son was in preschool, and I wanted to create a free Montessori charter school in my rural community. I actually said the words, how hard can it really be? And 2 decades later, I know exactly how hard it is to build and maintain a high-quality charter school in California. So I'm going to take you down the path that I went down and help you learn everything that you need to know to excel as a board member in a thriving charter school. Today, I would like to welcome Dr. Ting Sun to the show. Ting and her husband, Charlie Leo, were pioneers in the California charter school movement, and they're co-founders of the Natomas Charter School. Prior to her retirement and consulting work, Ting had a long career in education, first as a teacher and then working as one of the very first employees of the California Department of Education Charter Schools Unit. And she was one of the founding members of the California Charter Schools Association. Among other valuable contributions to public education, Ting served on the California State Board of Education for 7 years. And prior to that, she was appointed to the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, where she also served a term as board chair. Ting served as a board member on a number of nonprofit boards of small and large organizations, and she is well known and highly respected in charter school circles. I am delighted to have this opportunity to talk with her today. Welcome to Boarding Pass, Ting.
Thank you, Caitlin. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm happy to have this opportunity to chat. I think you and I first met way back when you were working for Department of Education in the charter schools unit, and charters were just barely being sort of thought about and constructed and all of that.
That's right.
I think that's when we first sort of intersected. So it's been a few years, just like charters, right?
Yes. Decades, actually.
That's right. It's been decades. So I wanted to ask you, I kind of, we're recording this and playing it for board members. And so I kind of wanted to start by asking you, you've served on a bunch of different boards, state boards, nonprofit boards. Any memorable experiences or stories that you want to share with our listeners?
Gosh, there's lots of experiences because of small and large. And I guess what I would say is that it can be sometimes surprising that you have really, really strong, educated, powerful people on a board, and yet it can still be not so effective. And that has a lot to do with the board culture. And I'm not pointing out any specific board that I've served on, but I think a lot of it has to do with board culture and with kind of really understanding what your role is on a board. Mm-hmm. And so my thing is just, basically you could have a really strong, powerful people on a board and can it still not be that effective. So
that's what they would still need to listen to these podcasts. They would still need to be better, right? At learning board governance. So, right. That's right. So take me back to 1992, 93. You and Charlie get this idea of opening a charter school. What made you decide to do that crazy thing? And did you feel like I did that, how hard could it be? Or were you actually like applying some common sense, knowing how hard it would be?
Oh, yeah, there was a little bit of that. Well, how hard can it be? And we were both there's these very naive teachers. And this opportunity to start your own school came up. And, we had been griping in the teachers' lounge about how middle school students need to go out more into the community, that we needed to do this and that. And so it was our opportunity to actually take action and create the school that we wanted rather than complaining about what currently existed. And we had initially was, well, how hard can it be? And it turned out to be really hard.
Really hard.
Yes. But at the same time, we had a lot of support at the time with the district superintendent. And we were very much a part of a district initiative to create something that's different, innovative within, and provide more choice within that within the district's options. So it was a great opportunity, and sometimes there's a little bit of naivety with it, which is actually good, because sometimes when you don't know what you don't know, you just go ahead and you just create something from scratch. So it was great. It's been a wonderful experience.
That's and that's interesting to hear you say you had the support of a superintendent. I think for the charter school that I started, it was the same thing. We had the support of the superintendent, we had the support of the school board, and it's ours is an independent charter school, yours is an independent charter school. But at the beginning, it really felt like there was much more of a camaraderie kind of around. Yeah, let's do this thing. Let's try something new, and that's changed a little since the early '90s.
Yes, and that is too bad, because the actual original tenet of charters was really around changing and restructuring school districts. It was not even so much about having all these independent schools, but it was a way for school districts to have more options within their portfolio of schools by allowing its schools to petition for a charter to do something different and to have more site-based decision making. And that, I think, was part of the initial charter school law and ideas, that you'd create some of these options within a district. And so, yeah, we did have supports from superintendents, and the first, I guess, decade of original founders really were, a lot of them were district people who started charter schools, or they were longtime principals in a district that started these schools.
Well, and I remember even in the debates around chartering, in the legislature, it was going to be teachers, they imagined, who would do just what you and Charlie did, sitting around in the faculty room, right, saying, we can build a better mousetrap here, right? And we have this innovative idea, and it just seems like it's evolved and changed so much since then, and that isn't sort of what people think about now when they think about starting a charter school.
Yeah, no, and that is unfortunate, because what an opportunity to have to be a teacher and be able to create your own school. That's the ultimate
Yeah.
empowerment, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, what else do you think? We talked a little bit about it, but what else do you think has sort of changed or evolved since 1993 in chartering? And I mean, there's a lot, but things that you think, rules around charter schools, or just sort of attitudes around charter schools, things that have changed since then.
Yeah, I so a lot of things. So yes, I think the distancing from traditional districts, and being part of a district, we went through a decade there where charters sought to be absolutely independent. Let's be independent for everything. And the legislation actually supported that, allowed the charter school to be direct funded, allowed the charter school to choose to provide its own special education, allowed the charter to do a lot of other to be able to uh, to test separately from the district. There was a lot of ways that charters separated more and more, and I think as a result, it almost created like these two systems. Unfortunately, you had the charter group system, and then you had the traditional public school district system,
Mhm.
and that did not bode well, I think, for the original intent of charters, which was to provide some be a laboratory of innovation, and for traditional districts to learn, and traditional schools to learn from the things that charters were doing. So I think that has that collaboration, and that initial idea around how we can transform school districts through chartering has really kind of disappeared, and it's not really part of the conversations anymore. The other piece is, of course, as a lot of folks know, legislation that has come on to charter schools that have essentially turned charter schools to become more like traditional school districts. And I think that while in some ways we are public schools and we should be held to account for public funds and for student achievement, all of those things, absolutely, charter schools should. At the same time, some of that legislation really curbs the innovative ideas and thinking. And we can talk about lots of details around that. But as a result, we have more charters that have to operate more like a traditional school or traditional district. And that then takes away some of that innovative thinking and the ideas, because a lot of our school leaders are just trying to deal with the compliance rather than think
Mhm.
about how they can innovate and change how we do public education so that we can better serve students.
You're absolutely right. As you're saying that, it makes me think that the original intent, like you said, of the charter school law was to have sort of charters be like the petri dishes, right, and have districts pick up things that they learned and could, try on because the charter school tried them first, and that maybe they would evolve. Originally, the idea was they would evolve to become more like the charter schools, and yet it seems like 32 years later, we are making charter schools into the sort of shape of the districts. And that was exactly the opposite of what the original language envisioned.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
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 I saw a presentation that you did, and I actually linked your presentation in the show notes. Maybe a couple years ago, on sort of the evolution of charter leaders, and I was really interested in that. And sort of, you took us on a walk, and I hope you'll do that today through that evolution of leaders, that sort of leaders 1.0 to hopefully some wisdom about leaders 4.0. And so, can you tell me a little bit more about that, and about and about your thoughts around how that sort of evolved over the last 3 decades?
Sure. Yeah. So it's hard to believe we're going into our fourth decade of charters in
Yeah.
California. And so as I was reflecting back on these past 3 decades, I think about Charter Leadership 1.0. And back in the days when charters were new and fresh, and this was a new idea, I think a lot of our charter leaders were mavericks. They were cowboys and entrepreneurs, and their character, they were impatient. They wanted to get something done. And what I call, they were fairly irreverent. They were mavericks, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I actually created mottos. So the motto for Leadership 1.0 was "Hell yeah, why not?" Right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And then Charter Leadership 2.0. So that's the second decade. And that's when charters were on a little bit firmer ground. You weren't so new anymore, but it was a huge decade of growth where there was a lot of independence. And I talked about a lot of charters kind of going off on their own and losing that connection to their districts.
Mm-hmm.
It was bigger and better was kind of what was the theme of the decade, is just more and more charters. Um, there was a lot of bucking of the system. We're different than you, type of attitude. And there was a lot of self confidence, I would say, and maybe even a little bit of arrogance in that second decade, because there are so many charters and they were growing. And we had some really strong backing from funders and from the legislature, too. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say the motto for Charter Leadership 2.0 was "Don't tread on me," right?
Well, and I was going to say too, Ting, I think I came in that second decade. You and Charlie were in that first decade, right? So we were
Mhm.
also learning from the Mavericks, right? And the Mavericks
Yeah.
were telling us, their whole version of events, and so I think maybe that also. I mean, we were literally learning from you, like you all were working with us as mentors in our schools, and so we were learning from you. So yeah, if it's that "don't tread on me," I'm going to attribute that right back to the 1.0.
Well, then we evolved to Leadership 3.0, which was kind of almost the last maybe decade, maybe last 7 years or so. And there was a change. And so I called that set of leadership the survivors. There was a lot of changes in legislation. No longer the darlings of the legislature. We charters were, they were starting to put more legislation on. increased accountability. We had some charters that did not fare so well. And there was a lot of public concern around some of those charters. And so as a result, um, a lot of legislation that curbed back and for charters and the expansion of charters. And so what I feel that the leadership 3.0 has been dealing with over the last 7 or more years and through the pandemic is a sense of, okay, we need to really sustain, we need to partner again. The idea that, hey, we can't just be independent and be on our own, that we do need partnerships and we do need to reach back out probably to our authorizers and to our district and traditional districts friends. So the model here over this last years, we've slowed down, is stay the course and survive to thrive. Right? It's been difficult for this last decade of leadership in charters.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
yeah. So
And
now we think about where we
yeah,
go
so
for,
what's 4.0
right?
look like? What is your, yeah.
Well, that is so hard to predict. And honestly, it's hard because we right now don't have leadership vision in education either at the state level or the national level. And so I think there was education overall as a nation and in the state. We were really thrown through COVID-19, the pandemic, and the school closures. And the last few years has been just trying to get back to normal, right? And so there has been the thought about, well, what's the vision for this next decade? And so I don't have a prediction for 4.0, but I do have some thoughts for 4.0 in that you have to still stay ahead of the game, right? We the Even though we had a pause in our education system through the pandemic and we're just kind of getting our footing again, it doesn't mean that the pace of change has slowed down when it comes to technology. And we talk about artificial intelligence and we talk about where students are these days. We're still needing to evolve in how we deliver instruction and how we teach students, today's students, right? And so we're not staying ahead of the game if we don't think about where they need to be 5 or 10 years from now, and we're not really planning ahead so that we're meeting them where they need to be. So I would say for board members and leaders moving into 4.0, that you really have to think about where the students are and where they will be in 5 years from now, and what they will need in the education system, and that requires us kind of thinking outside the box, and we're not seeing a lot of that right now. I actually have a really a favorite quote that by John Dewey, and it's, if we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, and I think that with the wave of artificial intelligence and AI, especially now, and the availability of that is really going to require us educators to think differently about how we teach and how we provide instruction and what student skills are needed. And so thinking about all of those things and then how you create a program around that, irrespective of all those compliance and rules and laws and all that, we have to really think about programming.
Sure, sure. And that sort of, sort of back to the board member portion of this, I think that goes a lot too to mission and vision of the school, right? So,
Right.
so really getting down on and thinking through and spending the time to think through, what is the school going to look like in 5 years? And
That's
how
right.
are we going to get it there? Because you're not just going to wake up in 5 years and poof, it's going to be whatever you imagined it would be, right? I mean, it takes steps and budgeting and hiring and expanding or facilities or whatever your vision is. And that I think that really underscores that need to do that work, the strategic planning, the mission and the
Yes.
vision, making sure those things are accurate. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. The
So, do you
strategic
think?
planning. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead. No, do this. Talk about the strategic planning part. Yeah. No.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I was just agreeing with you. The strategic planning is so critical. And you don't need to change your plan, your strategic plans every year, but you do need to plan out what you're going to do over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years and visit it every year to see if
Yes.
anything's changed. So,
Right.
yeah, I highly, highly, highly would recommend that, as a board, you engage in that and spend the time to do that.
Yeah, I
And
think looking at it sometimes as, a volunteer board member, you think, oh, that's a heavy lift and maybe next year's board will do it or, right. But as you said, everything's evolving so quickly that we need to get on top of getting ready for students 5 years from some students, who aren't even, born yet, right. And are going to be in the kindergarten class 5 years from now. And yeah,
that's right.
we need to get
Sure.
on in front of that. Do
Yeah.
you think that charter schools are still sort of accelerating positive change in California's public education system? Is there still a value add to charter schools?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I do think so. I do think so because charters still are fairly small. They are still very community based.
Mhm,
They are very. I find them more connected to their students and their parents than maybe a traditional school. And frankly, too, charters have to work to get students to come to their schools. So we don't
mhm,
have automatic enrollment. So there's a have to be that natural attention to making sure that you are serving the students that are
mhm.
coming to you because they're not automatically just going to come to your school because of a geographic location or anything like
Right.
that. So I think that is it. I think that there is a value to that. It's, I think, more around the thinking of how charters as a whole and as a movement furthers that idea of change within the education system where we're better meeting student needs, so as a whole, I think
Mhm.
individually charters are serving their communities, no doubt.
Right. And so then
Right.
I think we just have to, sort of extrapolate that and talk about, so if they're serving their communities, how can they make a bigger impact on the public education system, in particular in California? And back
Right.
to that original intent of the charter school law, right? That
Yeah.
said, this was the idea that they would do these things because you're absolutely right about that community. I mean, certainly lots of traditional schools have a great school
Mhm.
culture and community. But
Yeah.
charter schools, I feel like, are unique in that way because everyone chooses to be there. And
Hmm.
sometimes they were on a waiting list to be there. And so
Yeah.
when they get there, the kids, the families, they're just so invested in that school community. And
Right.
that's something that I think is a valuable addition to the education and all of the things that the students are getting to is that focus.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's
No,
great. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, when you and Charlie first started the school, I because you ended up with Natomas Charter School ended up with like 5 schools within a school. Is that right?
Yes.
Sort of. Yeah.
So we
I mean, talk about
we
evolving, right?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about our school, and this is where, because our beginnings was really being part of the school district, we have one charter. And basically, under that one charter petition, we were able to expand to different types of programs. We always
Mm-hmm.
talk about the charter itself being kind of like a wheel, and then the spokes, which are all the different types of programs uh, within that wheel, if you will. And
Mm-hmm.
it goes back to our overall arching um, commitment to providing more educational options within the public school system.
Mm-hmm.
So our programs started out with a middle school, um, small middle school program, and then we added a homeschool elementary program. Then we added a performing and fine arts academy. Then we added a high school independent study, which is now hybrid academy, and then a traditional elementary school type of program. So
Mm-hmm.
they're all very different from each other, but even within the charter, Natomas charter um, there are options. So it's kind of options within the charter.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's a great example of the flexibility and listening to the needs of your community and your families and what folks want, and being able to offer that at
Yeah.
one under one charter, even though it's on several different school sites, right?
Yeah. Yes. Right.
Now that takes a really unique person to oversee that, a charter leader. And you were in that role, Charlie was in that role, there's someone else in that role now. What do you recommend for board members as they are looking to hire and retain high quality charter leaders? Do you, how do they recruit them? How do they retain them? How do they, is there a succession plan that you recommend in terms of sort of growing your own within your school? What thoughts do you have about that?
So, yes, we have several charter leaders. I've noticed it from the last 8 years or so. A lot of the original founders of schools have moved on. They're retiring. They're moving on to different pastures, right? And so there are these new generations that are coming up. And I think for board members, when these transitions happen, especially with a founder of a school, even if you're going to hire within, I just recommend that succession planning. That's just not going to happen overnight, and you have to really think through what your needs are for taking that school to in the next 5 to 10 years, and what kind of leadership you'll need for that. And to do something, and that also goes back to your strategic planning. So if you're doing your strategic planning well, then you have an understanding of where you want to be in the 5 to 10 year range, and then you'll hire accordingly the type of skill set that you need. There are many of the charter schools that were started have expanded, and there are some great folks within that might be ready to move up. But if your charter, you're kind of looking for something different and innovative, you might look also outside of your charter for your next leader as well. So it just depends, but it always goes back to that strategic planning and understanding of where you need to be. And then and doing that succession planning so that you're not caught off guard, right? Because, we always say, what happens if something, happens to your leader, or they decide that all of a sudden they're going to move to Hawaii or whatever it is, as a board member, that's the worst thing, right? To be stuck without a leader. So you have to think about in the interim, what do you do in the immediate to put somebody in charge? And then what are you going to do a little bit more long term to get a charter director or principal or whoever it might be in place?
Absolutely. And you're so right about that strategic planning and thinking about that. You can't predict everything. You can't predict the move to Hawaii or, the partner to having a job transfer or whatever. You can't predict those things. But you can predict that those, like you said, those Charter 1.0 leaders are probably retired or retiring, right? And those 2.0 leaders are sneaking right up on retirement too.
That's
So if you're a school that's been fortunate enough to have a long time leader, you should, I think, have some provisions in place and be training people to move up into that role, because I think going to the outside can be hard, right? Trying to find someone who can carry that mission and that vision for you, who hasn't been part of your school culture in the past.
That's right.
Yeah. So, final question for you today. Again, we're focused on board members, and you've been a board member. What words of wisdom or encouragement would you offer to new or even veteran charter school board members as they, accept this new role or continue their journey on the board?
So I think for a charter board member, a typical charter board member is not necessarily an educator, right? So not somebody within education, usually a parent or a community member, someone who wants to serve, who believes in the charter, wants to serve, but may not know the ins and outs of education, if you will. And that's perfectly okay, because we want community members, we want parents, we want folks who are engaged in stakeholders to be on that board and to be part of that decision making for the school. So it can sometimes, I think, for folks like that to come in and feel a little bit intimidated or feel like, oh, I don't really know, I can't really contribute. And so they
Mhm.
let the administrator or the executive leadership kind of do a lot of presentations and provide information. So what I would
Mhm.
say for these board members is you don't need to know all of the content and how to run a school, but you do need to know the right questions to ask,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
about asking the right questions. It's about not knowing everything. And frankly, sometimes um, being a board member is not the most interesting thing because you're like going through budgets and you're getting
Yes.
presentations on compliance and blah blah blah. So there's a lot of that type of stuff. But knowing what questions to ask. So I would say one, pay close attention to your student achievement data.
Mhm.
That you should be getting a very thorough briefing. In fact, the CAS scores have just come out from last year. And so there should probably be a presentation pretty soon from your administration around how the how the school performed last year.
Mhm. Mhm.
So pay lots of attention to your student achievement data, both quantitative and the qualitative. And you should
Mhm.
also be getting information on student surveys and what parent surveys. So what are not just what the academic data is, but how are your stakeholders feeling about the school, about being in the school?
Mhm.
The other thing is, when I mentioned asking the right questions, when you are getting a presentation on an initiative or something, ask, how is this initiative um, connected to our mission?
Mhm.
How, how, how is this piece connected back to our mission, right? Because
Right.
always bring it back to what the school is about. You can ask questions about, hey, do we have the right skill set to make this actually happen? Right?
Yes.
And you can ask, what do you need from the board? What do you need from us? So that you have
Mhm.
clearer direction from the administration on how you can better engage and how you can respond and what types of decisions that need to be made so that you can be a better board member.
Absolutely. That's fantastic advice. And you're right. Asking the questions, feeling empowered to ask the questions, and not being afraid to learn something new and then ask questions about it because you're learning something new, right?
Yes.
I think that's really fantastic advice. I think lots of board members will benefit from doing that. So thank you for that. And thank you for being here today with me. I really have enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise, me too.
This has been Boarding Pass from CSDC, the Charter Schools Development Center. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts, and share this podcast with your charter school board member friends. Don't worry if you didn't get it all. We took notes for you. View today's show notes at chartercenter.org/boardingpass. Thanks as always to Greg Hall, Mike Watson, Melissa Cabral, and my friend and today's guest, Dr. Ting Sun. We'll see you next time on Boarding Pass.
Now that you've got your boarding pass to effective charter school governance, why not upgrade to first class? By becoming a member of the Charter Schools Development Center, you'll gain year-round access to expert guidance, cutting-edge resources, and a network of experienced charter advisors. CSDC membership is your fast track to excellence in charter school governance, offering personalized support and professional development opportunities that will help you and your school soar to new heights. Go to chartercenter.org/membership to learn more.